What would you do if your child got a 0 for writing too well and no one believed she was innocent? I never thought I would become the kind of mother who storms into a high school demanding to see the principal, but there I was on a cold March morning, my hands shaking as I gripped my daughter's handwritten essay like it was evidence in a criminal trial. Looking back now, I can see how naive I was to think that hard work and honesty would always be enough in a world where algorithms make decisions about our children's futures. My name is Rebecca Torres, and I am 42 years old. I have been a journalist for nearly 20 years, writing feature articles for a mid-sized newspaper in suburban Pennsylvania. I raised my daughter Sophia alone after my husband Daniel left when she was only 3. Money has always been tight, but I made sure Sophia had everything she needed, especially when it came to her education. She is 16 now, a junior at Riverside High School, and until that devastating phone call in early March, she had a perfect grade point average and a promising future ahead of her. Sophia has always been a dedicated student, the kind of kid who color codes her notes and starts her homework the moment she gets home. She inherited my love of writing, and I often found her curled up on the couch with a novel or scribbling away in one of her mini journals. Her dream was to study English literature at Princeton, and with her grades and test scores, that dream seemed within reach. We had even visited the campus the previous fall, and I watched her eyes light up as we walked through the historic halls. I remember thinking that all our struggles, all the nights I worked late to pay the bills, all the sacrifices we made would be worth it when I watched her walk across that stage with her diploma. But dreams can crumble quickly when they are built on the shaky foundation of someone else's certainty. The trouble started on a Tuesday afternoon in early March. I was at my desk, working on a story about local small businesses, when my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I almost sent it to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Ms. Torres, this is Daniel Green calling from Riverside High School." "I am Sophia's English teacher," the voice said. He sounded young, confident, almost cheerful. "I wanted to discuss some concerns I have about a recent essay submission." My stomach dropped immediately. Sophia never had problems with her schoolwork. "What kind of concerns?" I asked, already saving my document and grabbing my keys. "Well, I hate to say this, but I have reason to believe that Sophia did not write her essay herself. Our district recently implemented an AI detection system, and her paper came back with a 94% probability of being AI generated. I am afraid I had no choice but to give her a 0 for academic dishonesty." I stood up so fast my chair rolled backwards and hit the wall. "That is impossible. Sophia wrote that essay by hand during class. I know because she told me about it. She was nervous about the timed writing portion." "I understand this must be difficult to hear," Mr. Green continued in that same calm, almost patronizing tone, "but the technology does not lie. The detection software we use is very sophisticated. It analyzes patterns, sentence structure, vocabulary choices, all sorts of linguistic markers that indicate artificial intelligence generation." "But she wrote it by hand," I repeated, my voice rising. "In your classroom. How could she have possibly used ChatGPT when she was sitting at a desk with a pen and paper? Students are very clever these days, Ms. Torres. She could have generated the text beforehand and memorized it, or perhaps she had notes. Either way, the software has flagged it, and district policy requires me to treat it as academic dishonesty. The essay counts for 30% of her final grade." I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. 30%. That would drop her grade from an A to AD. It would destroy her GPA. It would put her scholarship applications in jeopardy. Princeton would be nothing more than a painful memory. "I want to see this so-called evidence," I said, forcing myself to sound professional even though I wanted to scream. "And I want to meet with you and the principal as soon as possible." "Of course. I can arrange a meeting for tomorrow afternoon. But I should warn you, Ms. Torres, that the software has been very reliable. We have caught several students this semester already." After I hung up, I immediately called Sophia. She answered on the first ring, and I could hear that she had been crying. "Mom, I swear I wrote every word myself," she sobbed. "I do not understand what happened. Mr. Green pulled me aside after class and told me I cheated. He would not even let me explain. Everyone was staring at me. I know, baby. I believe you. "We're going to fix this," I said, even though I had no idea how. That evening, Sophia showed me the essay prompt and her handwritten response. The assignment had been to write a personal narrative about a moment of growth or change, and she had written about learning to cope with her father's absence. It was beautiful and heartbreaking, filled with the kind of raw emotion that only comes from lived experience. Her handwriting covered 4 pages of lined paper, complete with crossed-out words and margin notes where she had revised her thinking in real time. "Mr. Green collected these right after class," Sophia explained, pointing to the pages. "We had 90 minutes to write. I did not even have my phone with me. He makes us put them in a basket at the front of the room." I read through the essay twice, looking for anything that might have triggered the AI detector. Her writing was sophisticated but not impossibly so. She used varied sentence structures and descriptive language, techniques I had taught her over the years. There was one metaphor about grief being like a winter that eventually gives way to spring that struck me as particularly lovely, but everything else seemed perfectly normal for a talented 16-year-old writer. "This is excellent work, Sophia," I told her, pulling her into a hug. "And we are going to prove it." The next afternoon, I took off work early and met Sophia at the school. The principal, Grace Mitchell, was a tired-looking woman in her 50s who seemed perpetually overwhelmed by the demands of running a school of 2,000 students. Mr. Green sat across from us in her cramped office, looking far too comfortable for someone who had just accused a student of cheating without evidence. He was younger than I expected, probably 38 or 39, with fashionably messy hair and expensive sneakers that seemed at odds with his button-down shirt and tie. He had the air of someone who considered himself progressive and tech-savvy, the kind of teacher who probably made his students follow him on Twitter to see his thoughts on education reform. "Thank you all for coming," Principal Mitchell began, folding her hands on her desk. "Mr. Green, why do not you walk us through your concerns?" Mr. Green pulled out his laptop and turned it to face us. On the screen was a scan of Sophia's essay alongside a report from something called the EDU Guard AI detection system. The report showed various highlighted sections of text and a large percentage at the top, 94% AI probability, in red. "As you can see, the software has identified numerous markers consistent with AI-generated text," he explained, pointing to different highlights. "The sentence complexity, the vocabulary sophistication, the structural coherence, all of these elements suggest that this was not written by a typical 11th grade student." "So you are punishing her for writing well?" I asked, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. "I am holding her accountable for academic dishonesty," he corrected. "Look, I understand you want to defend your daughter, but the data does not lie. This software has been trained on millions of essays. It knows the difference between authentic student work and AI generation." "But she wrote it by hand in your classroom," I said slowly, as if explaining something to a small child. "You watched her write it. You collected it immediately after the period ended. When exactly do you think she used AI? She could have generated the essay beforehand and memorized it, or written it down from notes she prepared in advance," he replied without hesitation, as if he had already worked out all the possible objections. "I have seen students do it before. They are very creative. Do you have any actual evidence of that? Did you see her with notes? Did any other student report suspicious behavior?" I pressed. Mr. Green shifted uncomfortably. "The software is the evidence. That is the whole point of having this technology. We cannot rely solely on teacher intuition anymore. We need objective measures." "Objective?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You are destroying my daughter's academic record based on an algorithm, and you are calling that objective?" "Ms. Torres, I understand you are upset," Principal Mitchell interjected, "but Mr. Green is following district policy. When the AI detection software flags an assignment, we are required to investigate and take appropriate action if the evidence supports academic dishonesty." "But there is no evidence," I practically shouted. "Just a computer program that says her writing is too good. That is not evidence, that is an insult." Sophia had been silent throughout the exchange, staring at her hands in her lap. Now she looked up, tears streaming down her face. "I worked so hard on that essay," she said quietly. "I care about that topic. I wrote about my dad leaving, about how hard it was, about how I learned to be okay anyway. And now you are telling me it does not count because some program thinks I am a cheater." For just a moment, I saw something flicker across Mr. Green's face, maybe doubt or discomfort, but it vanished quickly. I am sorry you are upset, Sophia, but actions have consequences. If you used AI, you need to take responsibility for that choice. She did not use AI. I said again. And I'm going to prove it. The meeting ended with no resolution. Principal Mitchell said she would review the case but made it clear that without concrete evidence contradicting the software's findings, the 0 would stand. I left the office feeling helpless and furious, my arm around Sophia's shaking shoulders. Over the next few days, I threw myself into research. I learned that AI detection tools were notoriously unreliable, with false positive rates as high as 20 to 30% in some studies. I found articles about students being wrongly accused, about the tools flagging everything from Shakespeare to the Constitution as AI generated. I discovered that the software often flagged writing by non-native English speakers, students with learning disabilities who used assistive technology, and yes, students who were simply very good writers. I compiled all of this information into a detailed report, complete with citations and examples. I also gathered evidence of Sophia's writing ability, printing out essays she had written in previous years, including one from middle school that had won a regional competition. I wanted to show that sophisticated writing was not unusual for her, that she had always been talented. But when I submitted everything to Principal Mitchell with a formal written appeal, I received a response that felt like a form letter. The district stood by the AI detection software. The 0 would remain. If I wanted to continue fighting, I would need to take it to the school board. That is when things got really interesting. I was sitting at my desk one evening, reading through Sophia's essay for what felt like the 100th time, when something caught my eye. That metaphor about grief being like winter giving way to spring, I had read it before. Not in Sophia's essay, but somewhere else. I opened my laptop and started searching through my old articles, the hundreds of pieces I had written over nearly 20 years of journalism. It took me almost an hour, but I finally found it. 7 years ago, I had written a feature story about a woman who lost her husband in a car accident and slowly rebuilt her life. In the article, I had written, "Grief settles over us like winter, cold and unforgiving, but if we are patient, if we endure, eventually spring arrives with its promise of renewal." In Sophia's essay, she had written, "My father's absence felt like winter had moved into my heart, everything frozen in gray. But slowly I learned that even the longest winter eventually surrenders to spring." The metaphor was not identical, but it was close enough. Too close to be coincidence. Sophia must have absorbed it years ago when I was working on that story, when she was only 9 years old and I was probably reading drafts aloud at the kitchen table like I always did. She had taken my words, made them her own, woven them into her own experience without even realizing where the idea had come from. And that metaphor, my metaphor, had triggered the AI detection software. I sat back in my chair, stunned by the realization. The program had not detected AI at all. It had detected similarity to existing published content, my published content, and had incorrectly flagged it as artificial intelligence generation. The software could not tell the difference between AI and a teenager unconsciously echoing her mother's writing style. I immediately called Sophia into my office. "Did you remember reading any of my articles when you were younger?" I asked her. Specifically one about a woman who lost her husband? She thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Maybe. You used to read your work out loud sometimes when I was little. I remember liking the sound of your words." "Why?" I showed her the article and then her essay, pointing out the similar metaphors. "This is why the software flagged your paper. It thinks you plagiarized or used AI, but really you just borrowed an image from something you heard years ago and made it your own. That is not cheating, Sophia. That is how writing works. We all influence each other." "So I did copy you?" she asked, looking horrified. "No, baby. You were inspired by me. There is a difference. And more importantly, this proves that the AI detector is garbage. It cannot tell the difference between artificial intelligence and genuine human influence." I spent the rest of the evening documenting everything. I found the original article, printed out copies with the publication date clearly visible. I wrote a detailed explanation of how Sophia had likely absorbed the metaphor years ago. I even found research about cryptomnesia, the phenomenon where people unconsciously recall memories and believe they are original ideas. It is incredibly common, especially between parents and children. Armed with this new evidence, I requested another meeting with Principal Mitchell and Mr. Green. This time, I also invited a representative from a local newspaper where I worked and mentioned that I was considering writing an article about the school's use of unreliable AI detection software. Suddenly, everyone was very interested in resolving the situation quickly. The meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday. I arrived early with Sophia, both of us carrying folders full of documentation. Mr. Green looked decidedly less comfortable than he had at our first meeting, and Principal Mitchell had the weary expression of someone who knew this was about to become a public relations nightmare. "Thank you for meeting with us again," I began, keeping my voice calm and professional despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. "I have some new information that I believe will resolve this situation definitively." I laid out my evidence methodically. First, the article I had written 7 years ago, with the publication date highlighted. Then Sophia's essay, with the similar metaphor marked. Then the research on cryptomnesia and how children absorb language from their parents. Finally, multiple studies documenting the unreliability of AI detection software, including false positive rates and examples of the tools misidentifying human written content. What this proves, I concluded, is that your software did not detect artificial intelligence at all. It detected similarity to existing published content, which happened to be mine. Sophia unconsciously incorporated a metaphor she heard when she was 9 years old. That is not cheating. That is not even plagiarism. That is simply how human memory and creativity work. And the fact that your software cannot distinguish between that and AI generation proves that it is not reliable enough to be used for high-stakes academic decisions. Principal Mitchell looked uncomfortable. Mr. Green looked trapped. He opened his mouth several times as if to argue but seemed unable to form a coherent response. Additionally, I continued, I have been researching the EDU Guard AI detection system that you are using. Did you know that the company behind it has been sued twice in the past year by students who were wrongly accused of using AI? Did you know that their own documentation admits to false positive rates of up to 26%? Did you know that education experts have been warning schools against relying solely on these tools for exactly this reason? We were told the software was reliable, Principal Mitchell said weakly. By whom? The company selling it? Of course they told you it was reliable. They want your money, I said. But the research is clear. These tools are not ready to be used as the sole evidence of academic dishonesty. They are too flawed, too unreliable. And my daughter is paying the price for your willingness to trust an algorithm over your own professional judgment. I turned to Mr. Green. You watched Sophia write this essay in your classroom. You collected it immediately afterward. You have no evidence that she cheated other than a computer program telling you her writing is too sophisticated. When did teachers stop trusting their own eyes and ears? When did we decide that technology knows our students better than we do? Mr. Green looked down at his hands. I was just following the protocol, he muttered. Well, your protocol is wrong, I said flatly. And if this 0 is not removed from my daughter's record immediately, I will write the most comprehensive investigative article about this school's use of faulty AI detection software that has ever been published in this county. I will interview every student who has been wrongly accused. I will contact the parents of every child who received a 0 based solely on this software. I will make sure that everyone knows how Riverside High School destroyed a student's academic future because an unreliable algorithm said her writing was too good. The room fell silent. Principal Mitchell exchanged a long look with Mr. Green, and I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. She was weighing the risk of admitting they were wrong against the risk of this becoming a public scandal. Finally, she sighed. Mr. Green, in light of this new evidence, I think we need to reconsider our decision regarding Sophia's essay. But the software, he began weakly. The software is clearly flawed if it cannot distinguish between a student borrowing a metaphor from her mother and artificial intelligence generation, Principal Mitchell said firmly. Ms. Torres has provided compelling evidence that Sophia wrote this essay herself, drawing on her own experiences and perhaps unconsciously influenced by her mother's writing. That is not academic dishonesty. That is education working the way it is supposed to work. She turned to Sophia. I am sorry this happened to you. Your 0 will be removed, and Mr. Green will grade your essay based on its actual merit. We will also be reviewing our policies regarding AI detection software to ensure this does not happen to another student. I wanted to feel triumphant, but mostly I just felt exhausted and angry that we had been put through this ordeal in the first place. Sophia, however, looked like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Thank you, she said quietly. 2 days later, Mr. Green returned Sophia's essay with a grade. 94 out of 100, an A. He had included a brief note at the top that said, sophisticated use of metaphor and strong emotional narrative. Well done. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the harm he had caused, just a grade and 3 bland sentences of feedback. But the story does not quite end there. I did write that article, though I waited until after Sophia's grade was safely recorded. I interviewed education technology experts, parents of students who had been wrongly accused at other schools, and researchers who study AI detection tools. The article ran on the front page of our local paper with the headline, When Algorithms Accuse, the Cost of AI Detection in Schools. The response was overwhelming. I received dozens of emails from parents sharing similar stories, from teachers expressing frustration with being forced to use unreliable technology, from students who had been wrongly accused and too afraid to fight back. The school board held an emergency meeting to discuss the district's AI detection policies, and within a month, they had implemented new guidelines requiring human judgment and multiple forms of evidence before any student could be accused of using AI. Mr. Green, for his part, became noticeably less enthusiastic about educational technology. I heard from other parents that he had stopped using the AI detection software altogether and had gone back to relying on his own professional judgment to evaluate student work. Whether that change came from genuine reflection or self-preservation, I cannot say, but at least other students would not suffer the same fate as Sophia. As for Sophia, her GPA remained intact. She finished her junior year with straight A grades and spent the summer working on her college applications. When she submitted her common application essay to Princeton that fall, she wrote about the experience of being falsely accused and what it taught her about standing up for yourself even when systems fail. I cried when I read it, both because of the pain she had endured and because of the strength she had found. She got her acceptance letter in December, a thick envelope that made her scream so loud I thought something was wrong. Princeton, full scholarship, starting the following fall. When she called to tell me, I could hear the joy and relief in her voice, and I knew that all the fighting had been worth it. Looking back now, 2 years later, I think about how close we came to losing everything because of a faulty algorithm and one teacher's unwillingness to question the technology he trusted. I think about how many students might have been wrongly accused before Sophia, students whose parents did not have the resources or knowledge to fight back. I think about how we are rushing to integrate artificial intelligence into education without fully understanding the consequences or limitations of these tools. But mostly I think about that afternoon when Sophia called me in tears, convinced that her future had been destroyed through no fault of her own. I remember the desperation in her voice, the sense of helplessness and injustice. And I am grateful that I had the knowledge and the platform to fight for her, even as I recognize that not every parent has those advantages. The lesson I learned from this experience is simple but profound. Technology is not infallible. Algorithms are not objective. And when we trust machines to make high-stakes decisions about our children's futures, we are abdicating our responsibility as educators and parents to use our own judgment, experience, and humanity. Sophia is thriving at Princeton now, studying English literature just like she always dreamed. She calls me every Sunday to tell me about her classes, her professors, her friends. Sometimes she mentions that essay, the one that almost derailed everything, and we laugh about it in the way you can only laugh about trauma once enough time has passed. But I know that for every Sophia whose story has a happy ending, there are countless other students who were not so lucky. Students who accepted their zeros without fighting because they did not know how. Students whose parents trusted the school's judgment over their own children's word. Students whose dreams were permanently damaged by unreliable technology and inflexible policies. That is why I am still writing about this issue 2 years later. That is why I speak at school board meetings and education conferences. That is why I refuse to let people forget what happens when we prioritize efficiency and technology over human judgment and compassion. Because my daughter was given 0 on her essay even though she wrote it by hand, even though she poured her heart into it, even though she did absolutely nothing wrong. And if it could happen to her, it could happen to anyone. The 0 has been erased from her transcript, but the memory of that injustice remains. It reminds us that progress without wisdom is not progress at all. It reminds us that in our rush to embrace the future, we must not forget the values that have always been at the heart of education: fairness, compassion, and the unwavering belief that our students deserve to be seen and heard as the complex, creative human beings they are. That is a lesson worth remembering, regardless of what technology comes next.